In the heart of 10th century Mercia, behind the fortified walls of a kingdom teetering between survival and annihilation, Queen Aethelflaed bore secrets that could shatter her reign and her life. Alliances forged in blood and whispers of forbidden love would ignite a chain of betrayal and terror, unseen by the outside world. In this story, we uncover the grim reality of a queen whose power and passion collided with treason, fear, and human cruelty, a truth far darker than any legend has dared to tell. In the year 914, Mercia was a realm shadowed by uncertainty, poised between survival and submission under the looming presence of Wessex to the south and Norse incursions to the north. Its forests, rivers, and fortified burhs concealed both defenders and spies. The people whispered of a queen whose reputation for wisdom and strength rivaled that of kings, yet whose mind was a labyrinth of calculation and secrecy. Aethelflaed, the Lady of the Mercians, moved through her halls with the careful grace of one who knew that every glance, every gesture carried meaning beyond the surface. To her courtiers, she was a figure of authority. In private, she carried the burden of knowing that loyalty in her court was as much a mask as a vow. The seeds of catastrophe often appear in moments that seem inconsequential. A minor act of defiance, a word spoken in jest, or a fleeting glance could set the machinery of betrayal in motion. One evening, in the quiet of the northern hall, Aethelflaed allowed herself a private observation of her counselors, noting the subtle signs of ambition and resentment that lingered behind practiced smiles. In those moments, she glimpsed the fragility of power. The same men who swore fealty could, in an instant, become instruments of ruin. Mercian law was strict, uncompromising, and unforgiving. Treason was a crime not merely against the crown, but against the very fabric of the kingdom. In her mind, Aethelflaed balanced the precarious duty of leadership with the dangerous human impulses of her subjects. Her advisors, soldiers, and scribes all existed in a tense equilibrium, their loyalty genuine in public but easily swayed by fear, greed, or foreign influence. Even a single misjudged word could ignite suspicion, and suspicion, once sown, often grew into the flames of violence. Outside the halls, the people of Mercia endured raids and famine, their lives inseparable from the political machinations above them. The queen understood that her decisions were not abstract. Every order, every alliance, directly affected the survival of families and villages. Yet the personal and political were inextricably entwined. Within her chambers, the air was thick with the weight of secrecy and unspoken knowledge. It was here, in the quiet, that the first whispers of treason began to stir. Aethelflaed sensed that one misstep could unravel everything she had built. The court was a place where shadows carried more truth than words, where the smallest act of curiosity could be fatal. As she moved silently through the corridors, she felt the eyes of the kingdom upon her, yet few truly knew the burdens she bore. Each calculated smile, each measured gesture, was a shield against forces that would exploit the slightest weakness. And so the stage was set. In the shadowed halls of Mercia, beneath the veneer of royal order, the first threads of a dangerous intrigue began to weave themselves, unseen yet inevitable. The queen's mind, sharp and unyielding, began to navigate the perilous intersection of loyalty and betrayal, desire and duty. What appeared to be a simple courtly ritual was in truth the opening act of a story that would descend into the darkest corners of human ambition and the horrors hidden within a realm ruled by fear, love, and the unrelenting demands of survival. The shadow of Mercia's northern borders bore constant reminders of past invasions. Danish raiders had scarred the land for decades, leaving behind burned villages, shattered families, and deep-seated mistrust. In the aftermath of one such incursion, a captured Danish noble named Sigurd was brought to Aethelflaed's court. His presence was both a prize and a threat, a living embodiment of her kingdom's vulnerability. To the public, he was a political tool, a bargaining chip against Wessex, or a deterrent against further raids. Yet in the quiet chambers of the queen's residence, his fate became entangled with hers in ways no treaty could foresee. Aethelflaed, ever cautious, recognized the duality of this prisoner. To show leniency risked appearing weak, yet cruelty alone could spark rebellion, even in the loyalty of her own subjects. She began clandestine meetings with Sigurd, ostensibly to extract intelligence about northern alliances, raiding patterns, and possible threats. Each meeting was tightly controlled, guarded by both secrecy and ritual. A single servant's curiosity could undo months of careful strategy. But as days passed, she noticed subtle changes in the way he observed her, the precision of his words, the intensity behind his silences. A connection, however dangerous, began to form, born not of trust, but necessity, curiosity, and the strange human need for understanding in isolation. The queen understood immediately the stakes. Every glance carried the weight of potential betrayal. Every misstep could unravel her rule or end in her own death. And yet, in Sigurd's presence, she felt an unspoken recognition, a shared acknowledgement of how human survival often collided with desire, fear, and ambition. Their interactions, initially methodical and politically motivated, began to carry subtle intimacy. A brush of the hand while passing scrolls, an exchange of meaningful glances, a conversation stretching beyond mere tactical matters. These small acts held mortal risk. Yet they also revealed the fragile humanity beneath the veneer of queen and captive. The court remained unaware, but the political ramifications loomed like a hidden blade. Aethelflaed's advisors were vigilant. Even the smallest rumor could ignite suspicion. Within the queen's mind, a constant calculation took place: how to maintain authority while navigating a relationship that could be interpreted as treasonous. Loyalty, both hers and Sigurd's, became a complex web of strategy, trust, and unspoken fear. Every decision, every word, had consequences extending far beyond the immediate room. In the dimly lit halls, whispers of her secret began to ripple subtly, though no one yet dared confront it openly. Each meeting required a careful orchestration of timing, shadows, and silence. Aethelflaed found herself balancing the delicate interplay of duty, political survival, and the dangerous stirrings of emotion that threatened to compromise all she had built. It was a pact forged not in friendship or love, but in necessity, a dangerous alliance that could topple kingdoms if revealed, yet provided a rare measure of understanding in a world defined by suspicion. As the queen prepared for another evening of counsel and strategy, she carried with her the unspoken weight of this forbidden bond. It was a connection that could not be admitted, a tension that might fracture her court, and a secret capable of inciting violence, betrayal, or death. In the silent chambers of Mercia, desire and strategy converged in a precarious balance, setting the stage for the unfolding tragedy. The queen, burdened by both ambition and human longing, now navigated a path from which there might be no safe return. In the days that followed, the quiet court of Mercia became a labyrinth of suspicion and hidden motives. Aethelflaed's careful balance of power had begun to strain under the weight of secrecy. Her clandestine alliance with Sigurd, once a calculated strategy, now threatened to unravel under the relentless gaze of her advisors and confidants. The court, outwardly obedient, was a fragile network of ambition, fear, and self-preservation. Every smile masked intention. Every gesture concealed the possibility of treachery. Those closest to the queen, her stewards, scribes, and senior warriors, were caught in an invisible web of loyalty and coercion. Bound by oath, they were expected to protect her secret, yet the human impulse for survival often outweighed duty. Small betrayals began to emerge, subtle and insidious. A misplaced word in the hall, a glance too long in the corner of a chamber, a servant overhearing fragments of conversation. Each carried the potential to ignite disaster. Aethelflaed observed carefully, measuring each reaction, weighing each loyalty, yet the constant vigilance began to wear on her mind. The court's very walls seemed alive with whispers, and she realized that even her closest allies might be instruments of her ruin. Paranoia settled like a shroud. In the dead of night, the queen would pace the hallways of her fortress, listening to the creak of doors, the murmur of guards, the faintest echo of footfalls. She knew that human ambition was often more dangerous than any foreign army, and the danger lurking within her own household was invisible yet deadly. Each individual carried a personal calculus: protect the queen and risk punishment from rivals, or betray her and gain favor or safety. Within this precarious network, trust had become a currency too costly to spend. At the center of this tension was Sigurd, whose presence complicated every calculation. He was both a shield and a threat, a source of critical intelligence, yet also a symbol of forbidden desire. The queen's interaction with him, once limited to strategy and observation, had evolved into a series of delicate negotiations of power and emotion. Each private meeting carried the risk of exposure, each shared glance a potential act of treason. Yet, within the boundaries of secrecy, a fragile understanding developed, one rooted in the mutual recognition of danger, necessity, and the raw human need for connection. Outside the chambers, the court's machinery of observation operated silently. Courtiers, knights, and scribes, trained to notice subtleties in behavior, began to whisper among themselves. Rumors, slight as shadows, began to ripple through the corridors. No one dared confront the queen directly, yet every hushed word added pressure, a quiet tightening of the net. Aethelflaed, ever vigilant, knew that any revelation could trigger swift and brutal consequences. The weight of this knowledge pressed upon her, blending fear with the acute clarity required to navigate the treacherous landscape of power. The threads of deceit extended far beyond her immediate surroundings. Alliances shifted, loyalty became conditional, and the line between friend and foe blurred. Within Mercia, the queen had to reconcile the intimate human need for trust with the harsh reality that trust could be fatal. The court, once a place of order and hierarchy, had transformed into a living entity of suspicion, each member a potential agent of destruction. And so, as night fell and torches cast trembling shadows along the stone walls, Aethelflaed understood that survival required not only wisdom but relentless vigilance. The intricate network of secrets she had spun now threatened to ensnare her, each thread a potential weapon. The queen's mind, sharpened by necessity, worked tirelessly to anticipate every betrayal, every whisper, every shadow, aware that the coming days would demand both cunning and courage in the quiet war unfolding within the heart of Mercia. Mercian law was absolute, a rigid framework designed to maintain order in a land scarred by war and uncertainty. For Queen Aethelflaed, its weight was both a tool and a threat. Justice in Mercia was swift, uncompromising, and often cruel, a reminder that the crown itself was bound by the expectations of law and the fear of retribution. Those accused of treason or betrayal were not merely punished. They were made examples of, their suffering a spectacle designed to ensure obedience. The queen watched, silently and with a measured heart, as these rituals of punishment unfolded before her. It began with her courtiers. One by one, men and women who had once sworn loyalty were accused of conspiracy, often on the flimsiest evidence. Torture, interrogation, and humiliation revealed secrets, real or imagined, until the accused were broken, physically, mentally, emotionally. The queen observed the iron instruments, racks, shackles, and the cruelly designed implements meant to extract truth at the expense of flesh and sanity. Each act was a testament to the uncompromising nature of Mercian law and the ruthlessness required to maintain control. Aethelflaed understood that her position offered no immunity. Royal blood did not shield one from the consequences of accusation. She had seen advisors shudder under questioning, their faces pale, their voices trembling as they confessed crimes they had not committed, hoping to survive. Every confession, every act of submission, served as a reminder of the delicate balance of power. Even those closest to the queen could be ensnared by the court's mechanisms, their fates subject to the unpredictable tides of fear, suspicion, and vengeance. The queen's heart grew heavier as she witnessed the emotional toll. These were not merely public punishments. They were acts that shattered families, friendships, and the very fabric of her court. She noted the silent calculations in her subjects' eyes, the fear, the awe, the creeping realization that loyalty was conditional, that survival often required cruelty. In the corners of her halls, she saw whispered conversations, anxious glances, and the subtle manipulations that ensured obedience. Justice in Mercia was more than law. It was theater, a psychological dominion over the human spirit. Amid these observations, Aethelflaed felt the sting of isolation. The court's rituals were necessary for stability, yet they underscored a bitter truth. No position of power could entirely insulate one from betrayal or moral compromise. She wrestled with the knowledge that her own secret, her forbidden alliance with Sigurd, placed her in a precarious position. One misjudged move, one overheard word, and she could find herself at the mercy of the same instruments she now observed. Beyond the court, the people of Mercia regarded justice with a mixture of reverence and fear. Tales of punishment traveled through villages, carried by travelers and merchants, ensuring that obedience was ingrained in both ruler and subject. The queen recognized that fear was a tool as essential as strategy. It maintained order, but it also cast a shadow over every interaction, every decision. As she moved through the halls, Aethelflaed contemplated the paradox of power and law. Justice was absolute, yet the human element rendered it unpredictable. She realized that her reign depended not only on wisdom and courage, but on her ability to anticipate the cruelty of both the law and those who executed it. The instruments of punishment, the cries of the accused, and the calculated terror of her court were constant reminders that survival demanded vigilance, ruthlessness, and an unflinching understanding of human nature. In this crucible of power, fear, and morality, the queen began to shape her own code, one forged in shadows, informed by the harsh grip of justice, and tempered by the knowledge that even the crown could not shield the heart from the suffering it imposed. The halls of Mercia, once a symbol of order and authority, had grown tense with fear. Rumors slithered through corridors like smoke, subtle yet suffocating, leaving courtiers anxious and defensive. Whispers spoke of betrayal, of hidden plots, and of a shadow that moved unseen but felt by all. The court, always a fragile ecosystem of loyalty and ambition, now trembled under the weight of uncertainty. Every glance carried suspicion. Every whispered conversation was suspect. And in the midst of this, Queen Aethelflaed felt a rising dread, the sense that her most trusted alliances could become instruments of her undoing. It began quietly, with a death that few questioned publicly. An elderly steward, revered for decades of loyal service, was found unresponsive in his chambers, a solitary figure consumed by a sudden, unexplained illness. There were no signs of struggle, no visible cause, yet the timing was ominous. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed natural. To Aethelflaed, who had learned to read the subtle language of her court, it was deliberate, a silent warning, an invisible blade aimed at her and those closest to her. The queen's mind raced as she considered the implications. Could her enemies have discovered her secret? Was this a preemptive strike intended to destabilize her rule or force her hand? Each thought carried its own danger. A single misstep could expose the fragile threads of her hidden alliance with Sigurd. The line between political maneuvering and personal peril had narrowed, leaving her in a state of constant vigilance. She realized that in Mercia, even love could be weaponized, turned into leverage against the unwary. Aethelflaed moved through the court with measured caution, noting every expression and gesture. Advisors who had once seemed devoted now avoided her gaze or lingered too long in conversation with others. Servants whispered in corners, and soldiers cast furtive glances as if sensing the invisible tension in the air. The queen understood that fear was contagious, and that it spread faster than truth, poisoning loyalties and magnifying distrust. Even the smallest rumor could ignite panic, and panic could destroy carefully laid plans. In private, she confronted Sigurd, assessing the loyalty that had once seemed unwavering. He too recognized the danger. Their relationship, born of necessity and human connection, now carried lethal consequences. Every meeting required a careful choreography of silence, timing, and observation. One misstep, one overheard word, and both could fall victim to the ruthless calculus of court politics. Aethelflaed felt the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest, a tangible reminder that every decision had life and death implications. The queen's thoughts turned to the broader implications. The court's fear could be exploited, yet it could also spiral beyond control. A single act of manipulation, a whispered suggestion, might ignite widespread paranoia. She understood the necessity of maintaining authority while remaining unseen, invisible in her vigilance. Her power depended not on strength alone, but on her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of perception, rumor, and suspicion. By nightfall, the atmosphere in Mercia had thickened with dread. Courtiers moved like shadows, careful to avoid inadvertent missteps, while Aethelflaed observed silently, calculating, planning. The death of a single steward had exposed the fragility of her domain. Every heart carried fear. Every hand might conceal betrayal. The queen understood that survival required more than strategy. It required foresight, resilience, and the unflinching courage to face the invisible poisons lurking in her halls. The seeds of terror had been sown. In the silence of the night, as torches flickered against stone walls, Aethelflaed realized that the game had escalated. Fear, rumor, and unseen threats now shaped every action, and the delicate balance between love, trust, and survival had grown perilously thin. By the time the court of Mercia recovered from the first tremors of fear, Aethelflaed's clandestine bond with Sigurd had grown in both intensity and danger. What began as political necessity had evolved into a complex interplay of desire, dependence, and unspoken terror. Each meeting, each secret conversation, was weighted with consequence. The queen felt the thrill of human connection alongside the dread of exposure. A single miscalculation could cost her throne, her life, or the life of the man she had come to trust. Desire and duty had become inseparable, yet each step forward carried the risk of destruction. In the quiet chambers of her fortress, Aethelflaed grappled with a paradox. She needed Sigurd's counsel and insight as much as she feared the vulnerability that intimacy imposed. Their proximity created tension that was at once magnetic and perilous. Every brush of a hand, every subtle glance, carried political significance. Courtiers might observe without knowing, spies could infer, and enemies would seize upon the slightest rumor to dismantle her carefully maintained authority. The queen had learned to treat her own heart as a battlefield, where strategy was as necessary as affection, and where the cost of error was lethal. The nature of their relationship had shifted subtly, from careful communication to a silent negotiation of emotion. Sigurd, once merely a source of intelligence, had become a mirror to her solitude, reflecting both her fears and her humanity. Aethelflaed recognized the danger of dependency. Desire in the court of Mercia was a form of vulnerability, and vulnerability was a weapon waiting to be wielded. The queen's mind constantly calculated how much trust could be afforded, how much affection could be shown without exposing a weakness that her enemies could exploit. Outside the sanctuary of her private chambers, the court remained a maelstrom of observation and rumor. Spies, servants, and advisors scrutinized every gesture, every word, with the precision of hunters. Even a small, intimate smile could be misinterpreted, and a glance shared too long could ignite suspicion. Aethelflaed understood that secrecy was not simply precaution. It was a survival mechanism. She learned to wield her own restraint as a tool of power, masking what she felt behind a measured exterior, while allowing the truth to exist only in the quiet spaces she shared with Sigurd. Yet emotional vulnerability and political necessity collided in ways that were unavoidable. There were nights when Aethelflaed awoke with her mind in turmoil, imagining the consequences of discovery, execution, imprisonment, or exile. The stakes were not theoretical. She had already witnessed the merciless enforcement of Mercian law on those accused of treason. Desire, in her case, was inseparable from risk. The queen could not separate love from strategy, nor loyalty from fear. Every heartbeat in the dimly lit corridors reminded her of the delicate balance she maintained. One false step could unravel everything. Within this tension, Aethelflaed discovered an unanticipated clarity. Desire, though dangerous, sharpened her awareness, forcing her to anticipate every potential threat, to measure every action, to consider the human heart as both ally and adversary. Each secret meeting became a crucible, strengthening her resolve even as it heightened her vulnerability. In the shadows of her chambers, the queen confronted the paradox of power and intimacy. She wielded authority with precision, yet she was bound by human need. Chains of desire, invisible yet unbreakable, intertwined her will with Sigurd's loyalty, compelling both caution and courage. In Mercia's unforgiving landscape, the collision of passion, secrecy, and political survival would leave its mark on both queen and kingdom, and set the stage for the deeper horrors to come. The court of Mercia had become a theater of shadows. Every face, every gesture carried double meaning. Behind ceremonial bows and outward loyalty, ambition thrived like a predator in silence. Aethelflaed, ever watchful, began to recognize the subtle signs of a court that fed on secrets. Whispers passed quickly between corridors, each echo a possible trap, each glance a test of courage. Survival in her kingdom was no longer determined by armies or fortifications, but by one's ability to navigate the ceaseless, invisible hunger of those around her. Rivals waited patiently, their eyes calculating, lips smiling while their minds plotted. Even those sworn to serve could exploit weaknesses for personal gain. Spies and informants moved among servants, scribes, and warriors alike, cataloging every slip, every hesitation. The queen observed their tactics with an unsettling clarity. Fear and manipulation were the true currency of power. Aethelflaed knew that a misstep could trigger not only political ruin, but emotional devastation. The court's appetite was voracious, consuming trust, loyalty, and sometimes, even the lives of those who had given everything to protect it. Amid this subtle cannibalism of the human spirit, Aethelflaed felt the weight of her own isolation. Her bond with Sigurd, once a source of solace, now bore its own danger. Intimacy, in this environment, became a liability. Every interaction between them risked exposure. Every unguarded glance could be interpreted as treachery. She learned to measure every word, every expression, and every step. Emotional restraint became essential, and yet, paradoxically, human connection was unavoidable. Desire and strategy, affection and prudence, collided continuously, forcing the queen into an intricate dance where one false move could be fatal. The queen's acute awareness extended beyond her private quarters. She watched how the court responded to fear and rumor, noting which courtiers thrived and which crumbled. The kingdom itself was a reflection of this silent hunger. In villages and fortresses, loyalty was fragile, shifting with rumor or the promise of advantage. Mercia's fragile cohesion depended not merely on the queen's strength, but on her ability to anticipate human greed and malice. Every decision had implications far beyond the walls of her hall, rippling outward like invisible currents of influence. The psychological toll began to manifest. Even the queen, celebrated for her fortitude, felt the strain of constant vigilance. Nights were spent listening for murmurs, imagining hidden plots, calculating potential betrayals. Sleep offered little solace, for the mind could not rest while the machinery of ambition and fear churned relentlessly. Aethelflaed realized that the human desire for power, like a predator, rarely slept. It waited, patient and precise, ready to strike when the moment was weakest. In this environment, ordinary interactions carried extraordinary risk. Loyalty could be feigned, friendship manipulated, and love weaponized. Aethelflaed understood that the court's hunger was not merely for material gain or political leverage, but for the suffering and secrets of others. To navigate such a court required not only intellect and courage, but a resilience that hardened the spirit while preserving the subtlety of the human touch. By candlelight, the queen reflected on her role as both ruler and target. She bore witness to the relentless appetite of her court, feeling the corrosive effect of their silent hunger. Survival demanded constant calculation, emotional fortitude, and a keen understanding of human nature. The shadows of ambition and fear would continue to shape every day, every decision, and every heartbeat within Mercia's stone walls. The night had fallen over Mercia like a suffocating shroud, and within the shadowed halls, the machinery of justice prepared to display its calculated cruelty. Aethelflaed's court, already tense from rumor and suspicion, braced for a spectacle designed to instill fear. An accused courtier, once a trusted steward of the queen, had been dragged before the advisors and soldiers, his fate determined not by truth, but by the exigencies of power. The queen, aware of the precarious balance she maintained, observed with a quiet dread. She understood the tools of justice in Mercia were as much instruments of terror as they were of law, and that the human spirit could be shattered with precision, leaving both ruler and subject vulnerable. The accused was shackled to the ancient wooden rack, its iron chains biting into wrists and ankles. Grotesque devices surrounded him, clamps, pulleys, and twisted implements designed to extract confession without mercy. The advisors, their faces masks of solemn authority, methodically applied pressure, alternating between physical torment and psychological manipulation. Each question, each pause was carefully orchestrated to unweave the mind, to turn loyalty into betrayal, and to make truth irrelevant. The queen's heart ached as she watched the transformation of a man she once respected into a trembling, broken figure, confessing to plots he had never conceived. Aethelflaed understood, in that darkened chamber, that innocence offered no shield. Her own hidden liaison, the secret she had nurtured with Sigurd, could be exposed in a single coerced whisper. Power, she realized, was a double-edged instrument. It could command obedience, yet it also magnified vulnerability. The court's fear, amplified by the grotesque spectacle, threatened to consume even her, demonstrating that human cruelty was both tool and weapon in the governance of Mercia. Each confession twisted reality, redefining events to fit the desires of those in power. The courtier, desperate to end the torment, named names he could not have known, implicating allies, rivals, and even hinting at the queen herself. Aethelflaed's pulse quickened, but she remained outwardly composed, recognizing the psychological strategy at play. Fear was contagious, and the manipulation of perception often carried more weight than truth. The tools, the cries, the sweat and blood, all conspired to transform justice into theater, a dark performance where every participant was both actor and victim. In the silence between agonizing cries, the queen reflected on the nature of authority in Mercia. Justice was absolute, yet human interpretation rendered it unpredictable. Even the most meticulous ruler could be ensnared by the orchestrated terror of her own court. Aethelflaed's mind calculated, anticipating potential exposure and plotting the mitigation of consequences. Her secret relationship with Sigurd could become a casualty, weaponized to destabilize her reign. She recognized that love, desire, and loyalty had become instruments of psychological torment, capable of unraveling both personal and political bonds. By the end of the night, the courtier was physically broken and mentally hollow, a testament to the effectiveness of fear and coercion. The advisors withdrew, satisfied that obedience had been reinforced and terror sown among witnesses. The queen remained in the shadows, absorbing the lesson. Survival demanded more than intellect or strategy. It required the unflinching recognition that power itself could be as fragile as the human soul. As dawn approached, Aethelflaed understood that the lines between justice and cruelty had blurred irrevocably. Fear had been weaponized, loyalty had been tested, and the court had been reminded that no secret, no bond, and no trust was beyond the reach of manipulation. The stage had been set for the next, inevitable confrontation, one that would demand courage, cunning, and sacrifice beyond all measure. The council convened in Mercia's great hall, its stone walls echoing with whispers and the faint creak of armor. What was intended as a session to root out treachery had become a crucible of revelation, where loyalty and deception collided with devastating force. Aethelflaed, ever vigilant, took her seat upon the dais, fully aware that the delicate equilibrium she maintained was on the verge of collapse. The chamber hummed with tension. Every glance, every gesture was scrutinized, and the queen knew that in moments like these, one misjudgment could yield irreversible consequences. It began with accusation. A courtier, already shaken from prior interrogations, faltered in recounting events and inadvertently implicated the queen's clandestine bond with Sigurd. The revelation, though unspoken until now, rippled through the assembly like a thunderclap. Faces shifted. Alliances fractured visibly in the flickering torchlight. Courtiers whispered, muttered, and cast suspicious glances toward one another, the undercurrent of fear feeding the frenzy. Power, once a stabilizing force, became a weapon wielded by those eager to seize advantage. Aethelflaed felt the weight of history pressing upon her. This was not merely political scandal. It was a threat to life itself. In Mercia, the exposure of treachery, real or imagined, demanded swift and merciless resolution. Execution, exile, or imprisonment could await anyone named, and the queen understood that even the sovereign could not fully shield herself from the consequences. The council, sensing the shift, moved with precision. Names were read aloud, charges declared, and allegiances tested. Each syllable echoed through the hall, like the tolling of a funeral bell for trust itself. The queen's mind raced. She had anticipated intrigue, deception, and even fear, but the raw intensity of betrayal shocked her. Courtiers she had relied upon now turned into instruments of accusation, some motivated by fear, others by ambition. Sigurd's presence was no longer concealed. His role in her court was now a symbol of both intimacy and danger. Aethelflaed's heart constricted at the knowledge that one false confession, one coerced word, could ignite a chain reaction that would consume both of them. Yet even as panic threatened to overtake reason, the queen acted with unflinching clarity. She wielded strategy as deftly as any sword, leveraging remaining alliances, reminding the council of the stability she alone provided, and countering threats with careful, measured authority. Every word, every gesture, was calculated to preserve life, maintain power, and contain the chaos that now threatened to engulf the hall. Political pragmatism collided with personal anguish, creating a storm that would leave permanent scars upon all involved. The council descended into chaos. Loyalties, once assumed immutable, shattered under the weight of fear and suspicion. Friends became adversaries. Allies betrayed one another to secure their own survival. Amid the maelstrom, Aethelflaed remained composed outwardly, yet inwardly she felt the corrosive burn of betrayal and loss. Her court, the very instrument of her authority, had become a landscape of fractured oaths and endangered lives. By nightfall, the queen's leadership had been tested to its limits. The council dispersed, some retreating in shame, others emboldened by the terror they had sown. Yet Aethelflaed understood that survival was no longer guaranteed by birthright alone. The collision of desire, secrecy, and political ambition had brought her to the brink. She faced a kingdom fractured by mistrust, a court poisoned by fear, and a personal life laid bare before those who would exploit it without hesitation. The stage was set for the final reckoning, where wit, courage, and ruthless strategy would determine not only the queen's survival, but the very soul of Mercia itself. In the shadow of blood and oaths, Aethelflaed braced herself for the ultimate test of power, secrecy, and endurance. The aftermath of revelation settled over Mercia like a cold, unyielding fog. The court, once a place of whispered alliances and subtle manipulation, had fractured into shards of fear, suspicion, and resentment. Aethelflaed moved among the remnants of her council, observing the silent calculations in the eyes of courtiers who now measured loyalty against opportunity. She knew that survival demanded more than courage. It required strategy sharpened to a lethal precision. The queen's heart carried the weight of secrets too dangerous to reveal, and she understood that the price of power had always been the burden of solitude. Her bond with Sigurd, once a source of solace, had been exposed, yet she found a strange clarity in the revelation. Public exposure had stripped away pretense, leaving only the raw calculus of survival. Allies had been lost, rivals emboldened, and trust had become a commodity rarer than gold. In this crucible, Aethelflaed discerned that power, like a blade, could protect or destroy, and that the secrets she bore were both her shield and her weapon. Every decision now carried immediate consequence, and the line between prudence and ruthlessness was thinner than a hair. The queen's strategy was subtle yet unflinching. She employed wit, manipulation, and the careful orchestration of fear to reassert control over her crumbling court. Names were reminded of their obligations. Alliances were reinforced or severed with calculated precision. The survival of Mercia itself depended on her ability to navigate a labyrinth of treachery while appearing composed, authoritative, and unshakable. Each move, each word, was a balance between diplomacy and dominance, a careful choreography designed to restore order without further bloodshed. Yet the personal cost was profound. Aethelflaed understood that she would carry the memory of betrayal, secrecy, and exposed desire for the remainder of her life. Her heart, tempered by the trials of her reign, bore scars invisible to the world. The queen had endured fear, witnessed torture, and survived exposure, but she knew that the weight of choices made in shadow would leave her forever changed. The kingdom's survival had required sacrifices that could never be confessed, and the knowledge of what had been done and what might have been lost haunted her every thought. In the quiet of her private chambers, Aethelflaed contemplated the paradox of power and solitude. She had maintained her throne, secured her kingdom, and outmaneuvered those who sought to unseat her. Yet the victory was shadowed by the knowledge that some truths could never be shared, some bonds could never be revealed, and some consequences would echo long after her reign. The queen's final act was one of calculated wisdom and sorrow. She preserved Mercia, shielded Sigurd, and ensured the continuity of her rule, but at the cost of her own emotional freedom. History would remember Aethelflaed as a ruler of unparalleled acumen, a queen who commanded loyalty and fear alike. Yet beneath the legend lay a hidden truth, a woman who had borne the darkest secrets alone, who had navigated the treacherous intersection of love, power, and survival, and who had emerged unbroken in body but irrevocably marked in spirit. The final secret remained with her, a quiet testament to the burdens of sovereignty and the haunting price of human desire in a world ruled by fear.